Hey, what's going on everyone? Vega here for SerpentX Tech, and in this video we're going to be talking about some of the issues some users have experienced with the RX 9070 XT from Aorus. And this includes the regular 9070 XT, where the thermal gel that they use for cooling this guy was seeping out when the people had their cards in a vertical setup rather than horizontal. I'll throw up some of those pictures right now on screen. And while the earlier versions or revisions of this product are experiencing this issue, the later versions, Aorus made some updates and they're not experiencing the thermal gel seeping out of their GPU in a vertical setting. But with all that heat and gravity, that sucker just comes out the bottom. It can leak and kind of droop out towards the PCIe slot and so on. So we're going to be tearing down this card and replacing the thermal pads with some replacements, whether it's the G-Lid 17 watt per meter Kelvin, some GPU risers 20 watt per meter Kelvin, and so on. We're going to be replacing the thermal paste with Thermal Grizzly Duro Knot. And while Tech Power Up did mention replacing the thermal gel with thermal pads did improve temperatures by about 7 degrees, I have ran some tests before and after to bring you those results in the end of the video. But for now, let's shut this thing down, get this card out, start tearing it down, and we'll go through that process together, give you a basic overview on the teardown. Not going to go step by step just to save you some time, but there's some great guides on Tech Power Up and their GPU database. All right, so we got it laid out in front of us. I will say there's a couple of design features that I don't like this little plastic thing is like wiggly and weak. Dust likes to collect around the rim, so you gotta like make sure you dust it off very well. But yeah, around this rim, which helps with the wind turbulence or suction. But just I mean, it's a cool looking card. It's just some design elements I don't 100% agree with. You can see the white in there for the RGB, but to tear this sucker down, because we're all just trying to get the heatsink and front shroud off. If we really want to tear it completely down, there's other steps we could do, but we got our 4 main screws with a little warranty sticker that is not valid here in the States. And then we're going to have a couple more. So we got backplate screw. I don't think these two need to come off. They might need to, but it looks mostly towards the IO shield. However, we might take those off as well. You see there's 3 of them right here. But mainly the 4 main, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. That's for the PCB to go into the back plate. And then we got 5, 6 over here. So I'm going to attack those first 6, and I'll let you know if we need to take off these 3 on the IO. And there's more on the IO itself, but we don't need to attack those. And again, our mission is just to get this heatsink and top GPU shroud off so we could get access to the thermal gel and GPU die. So we were correct. We didn't need the 3 screws on the back side of the back plate that connect to the IO. And be careful of these connectors right here and any other connections. I'm going to lift this guy and kind of fold it towards me very carefully. There we go. And look for any other connections. There's another connection right there. We could see it. We got to be careful. Make sure we're getting everything we need to disconnected before we continue flipping over this top GPU heatsink and shroud. That small connector looks like it's managing the RGB. You could see they also have the back side connected to it, which is what illuminates the Aorus logo on the back. But that RGB wire, you can see it runs along the side channel here, and you can see how it loops in and connects, as well as the 3 fans, which are just ran off of these 2 connectors right here. And you can see the number of connectors that are on there. But that was a pain in order to get. So this one was easy to take off, the RGB. The next 2, I basically had it like really close to each other and had to use, don't pry on the wires, but had to grab the top of the connectors to pry off. Never grab it by the wires. If you depin it accidentally, it's going to be a pain. And now we can see the thermal gel. It really reminds me of thermal putty. You can see how when I pulled it apart, kind of pulled it up. We could also see the GPU die thermal application. We're going to do a better job. But now the cleanup is going to be such a pain. And what's funny is there's some thermal gel right here at the top, right above the memory modules that would sit, I guess, on these guys. But they were getting very little contact. You see that? You can kind of see the lines on them. That's what these are. I might leave that there, but everywhere else I'm probably going to replace at least the memory, VRMs, MOSFETs, all that stuff. Try to replace it with some thermal pads. Now here's the hard part. What size thermal pads do we need to use now that the thermal gel is no longer there? I know it's easier from a manufacturer standpoint just to sploosh a bunch of thermal gel on there and then it will make contact, spill out, whatever else. But yeah, that's going to be a bit of a pain. However, Tech Power Up, I don't know why I said however like that. Tech Power Up made it a little bit easier for us by putting some information on their GPU database, and I will have all that here in just a moment and provide that to you. But first, let's do some cleanup. Before I continue, I did want to point out that even though I had my GPU in the horizontal configuration, I did find areas where the thermal gel was leaking out. For example, here on the memory modules, which would have been right above here, these three. And if we look at it, gravity, if this card was upside down, would have probably made that thermal gel fall down in between those heat pipes and onto the fans to then hit the fan blade. Obviously the GPU was not ran upside down, but some cases allow you to do that. A vertical, horizontal, upside down, sideways at the front of the case. And I could see how this could present some issues. So I may just keep the thermal putty on the chokes and VRMs and just replace the memory pads. Because these chokes and VRMs don't even get near their thermal limits. But I may try to, like wherever there's access or extra, I'd probably push it to make sure that it's making sufficient contact with everything. But I did want to point out that there was a little bit of excess. Basically, Aorus, again, fixed this, but maybe probably a little too much thermal gel to everything. Hence the reason why it would squish out and leak out onto the GPU. You can actually see, if we look at the cold plate, by the way, which is very interesting, you could actually see the heat pipe setup, right? So there's an extra thick layer right here, and that's indented to help with the transfer of heat, the vapor chamber, and I find that very interesting. But probably just going to clean up the memory and GPU area, leave everything else alone, and we'll see what the thermal results are once I get everything back together. But I'll show you the cleaned up version with new thermal pads first, which I believe memory are 1.25 millimeter. And replace the thermal paste on the GPU die, and we should be good to go. So we got everything cleaned up. However, I did just realize something or pay attention to something. Do need to blow it off because you see the dust on there. But this looks like nickel plated copper. And that's a good thing because technically I can use my liquid metal trick, right, by protecting the CMDs, and there's a little bit more thermal paste right there. By protecting the CMDs or surface mounted devices around the GPU or GPU core, that I could use liquid metal on this thing. I don't know. I really got to test just good thermal pads on the memory and Duronot on the GPU core, but I really want to use liquid metal and see what happens to this cold plate. It looks like it will handle it just fine. If this was copper, that'd be bad. If it was aluminum, that'd be worse, but it might be nickel plated copper. Let me know in the comments if you can confirm that. It says N2503J. Let me know in the comments. But now I'm just going to apply some Duronot to the GPU core and replace or put the memory pads. Now memory pads thickness vary. Some manufacturers have soft or really hard ones. I'm using 1.5 millimeter on these instead of 1.25, but I'm going to test fit before I apply thermal paste to the GPU core to make sure everything seats and hits correctly, right? Because if it was too high because the thermal pad wasn't squishing and it was sitting too high, then it won't make sufficient contact with the GPU core and I'll be SOL. So let me do a test fit real quick, but I am using 1.5 because guess what? I don't have 1.25. I do have a 1 millimeter and a 0.5 millimeter, but I don't want to mix two thermal pads. So let's see if 1.5 from G-Lid would work. All right, got the thermal pads ready to go. A little bit of thermal paste spread out. Gonna try to move some of these pointy, like extra stuff, thermal gel, whatever, a little bit over, so that way they go back and actually make some contact with everything. But other than that, just got to reconnect The RGB is probably the one that extends the furthest. So reconnect that, reconnect these sides, and I'm gonna lower the GPU heatsink onto the graphics card, and then make sure everything makes contact before we tighten it all up. But next time you see this, it should be all back together and in the system. Gonna go ahead and insert this little clip just in case I messed up anything. We are back together, and I did have to put a little extra tension while I was tightening up those 4 main screws back there because the thermal pads needed to squish out. I even kept some of the thermal gel in a Ziploc bag. It's probably not going to last long, but it reminds me of thermal putty. Maybe I might be able to use it in some other application. Everything's all packed up. Thermal Grizzly Duro knot is in there. And let's just check the idle temperatures to make sure everything is loading as it should. The fact that we're even booted up is a good sign, because if I really messed up, then we wouldn't boot at all. Looks like all our sensors are showing as they should be. Idle or ambient air temperature chilling on desktop is 33 degrees right now. It's not bad. Memory junction temperature 60, and I think the fans are not even running right now. So that is an improvement. But let's see what happens under load if I really messed up something. But hotspot temperature, everything is a few degrees lower. Let's run those tests now, and I'll bring you back for that. Moving on to the data, we're using Geekbench AI for the first one, focusing on the maximum temperatures, which is the third column. We could see that the max GPU temp was 50 versus 43. Memory junction 74 versus 68, VDDC 45.9 versus 41. GPU hotspot temperature, it says 81 before, but let's eliminate that and let's say 49 56.1 versus 44.6, and then the SoC 66 versus 62, the GPU hotspot temperature max, or the second sensor, 88.8 versus 45. So the GPU did good on Geekbench AI, but again, this is a short-term benchmark. Let's look at Furmark next. We got the GPU temperature at 63 versus 60, 93 on the memory junction versus 90, 61 versus 59 on the VDDC. First hotspot temperature 97 versus 99. This is where we see a little bit of a problem. SoC 83 versus 80. Then the second hotspot temperature 99, 99. So we're about the same on Furmark, but that first hotspot temperature is something to note because that might be presenting a particular issue. Let's move on to the next benchmark. Now we're looking at Battlefield 5. We got 62 versus 62. We got memory junction 89 versus 89, so basically the same. 60 on the VDDC, 0.2 versus 0.4. Hotspot temperature number 1, 85 versus 87. So again, we increased our hotspot temperature a bit. SoC 80.1 versus 81.9. So even our VRM temperatures have increased just a hair, because that putty, if not replaced, and you break that initial connection, again, that can present a problem. Hotspot temperature number 2, 87.2 versus 91.2. So our hotspot and something on our VRMs are doing a little bit worse. We didn't replace the thermal paste or the thermal gel on the VRMs, MOSFET, stuff like that, chokes. But we did replace it for the memory, and there's actually a secret to that on what I had to do with the memory. But again, we're seeing some improvement in some tests, but not all tests, and there's a reason for that. Let's go on to the next. We got Steel Nomad now. 65 versus 64, 1 degree improvement. Junction on the memory, 93 versus 92, 1 degree difference. VDDC 64, 63. Hotspot temperature 89 versus 93 was the max we saw after. So hotspot, again, a problem. The SoC 85, 85, the same. Hotspot temperature number 2, or the max, 91.8 versus 94.4. So we definitely encountered a problem, but I have one more heavy compute test to show you. This one is 63 versus 62, so 1 degree improvement. 86 versus 84 on the memory junction temperature, so down 2 degrees. Not the 7 mentioned in Tech Power Up article, but again, there's a reason why that is. And then 62 on the VDDC versus 60. Hotspot temperature 97 versus 98, so we actually went up 1 degree on the hotspot on the first sensor. SoC 81.8 versus 80, so down 1.8 degrees. And then hotspot temperature number 2, 98.5 versus 102. It averaged out to around 98, so it's about 2 degrees warmer than before we made any alterations. And again, I'm about to explain why that is and the nightmare that I went through. All right, so last I left you, before we talked about the results, I jinxed myself by saying, hey, it looks like I didn't mess up, the system booted up, or something along those lines. Well, unfortunately, it's very hard to see from this angle, but from the PCIe slot angle, you can see in there was a small gap. Basically, the 1.5 millimeter was not squishing enough for the cold plate to make contact with the GPU die. So I constantly had to shut down the system, take this GPU out, redo it, back and forth. I tried multiple variations. I even tried 1.25 millimeter, and still there was something going on. Either the memory was getting too hot too quickly, or the GPU die was hitting the hotspot temperature too quickly. I got it stabilized, but not all thermal pads are created equal. That's what the article in Tech Power Up even warned. Even though I had exactly what we needed, it still wouldn't work. Even though I had a squishy 1.5, it still wouldn't work. So your mileage may vary. If you're thinking about doing this to your GPU, you need to have all these pads on hand, ready to go, and I did not. So I reordered another set of 1.25 millimeter thermal pads that I'm hoping are going to be a little bit more squishy to allow the GPU die to make better contact and still get the memory temperatures lower. I had to go back to that stupid putty that's in this card. What I did though is I reduced the amount that was in there drastically. You saw how much was in there. There was a lot of thermal putty in this sucker, and so I reduced it a lot. And by doing so, I allowed the clearance to be a little bit better, the GPU die to be good. I did improve memory temperatures in certain workloads by dropping 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, but the GPU die is not as good as I would like it. And because that cold plate is so small, I suspect that there's going to probably be a thermal limit on how cool we can make this card, unfortunately. But if you look in there, you can see that there's just a very small gap, so there might be a little bit extra thermal paste on the GPU core, but just be mentally prepared that you're probably going to have to do to set up a test bench. Instead of having it in a confined space like I am, where I got to take this case out, take the GPU out, do it all over again, do it in a test bench. Make sure you get it right before you go slapping it into your main system, because this was a back and forth nightmare, but eventually I did get it stable. But I think we're just going to have to do it better next time. The thermal pads did not fit, and it feels like for this particular GPU, and I'm not sure why 1.25 won't work, even though others have success with that, 1.5 won't work. It feels like I need 1.2 millimeter thermal pads, and that's probably why Aorus went with the thermal putty / thermal gel, is because the tolerances or the variation in their cold plate design, in their GPU design, there was just so many variations that thermal putty just made more sense. It's non-conductive. It will squish out on the various SMDs and not cause any issues. But obviously they put too much of it, causing the problem that a lot of people are seeing. Again, you won't see this with the newer, like if you bought your card recently at time of filming, but if you bought this card in the first few weeks, month of this GPU being released, you might experience it. So just be careful. It's not worth the hassle. If your thermal gel is not leaking, don't replace it. Just leave it alone, because the more you mess with it, the worse it's going to be. Just save yourself the trouble. You can see some of that thermal gel sitting out right now in the MOSFETs, but just save yourself the trouble. I didn't. I'm going to get it better with improved thermal pads, and even the thermal putty on those VRM / MOSFETs inductors, whatever it might be, maybe needed to be like, because once I broke that thermal gel bond, it just seems like some of those components are getting a little bit warmer now that I've done this. So long video. I'm sorry we didn't get the results we wanted. Some of you asked me to do this. I tried, but it seems that 1.5 and 1.25, at least the pads that I had, won't work. I need another set of pads that I'm going to try again in the future. So if I do, I'll give you guys an update after the installation, and we'll compare before and after now that I got the data. But yeah, it was a bit of a pain, and I think there's just too many variations in the tolerances on this GPU that what thermal pads you think you need, you might be wrong and have to keep on finagling with it and tinkering until you get it right. I still love the card. It performs well. Even right now, it performs well in certain workloads and stuff like that, and it's stable, but I know and feel like we could get those thermal improvements a little bit better. I would like to use Thermal Grizzly's Conductor Knot, but I know if I do that, because it's such a thin layer on the GPU core, that we're definitely going to need a smaller, memory thermal pad, maybe 1.15 millimeter, which I don't even think they make. But we'll see and have to cross that bridge when we get to it. Either way, I am out. This thing's in the system. I'm back up and running, and it's a pain in the butt. Just leave it stock. If it's not dripping, just leave it stock and save yourself the trouble. Hit that like button on the way out. Make sure to get subscribed. Hit the notification bell to stay up to date, as well as check out additional links in the description to help support the channel and what we do here. And I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.